Okay, let's bring on. Actually, I'm not going to introduce the panel. I'm going to bring on my man Javier Hasse. I'm going to let him. There he is. I'm going to let Javier introduce the panel. Javier, we're about to talk about our favorite thing, cannabinoids.
Yes, sir. We are talking about pharmaceutical cannabinoids and their impact in treatments for complex diseases. Nice. It's a very, very, very interesting panel that we have today within the context of the Benzinga Small Cap Healthcare Conference, right? Very specific topic, an emerging sector in the healthcare industry. And the panelists we have together today are great. We have Eric Xu, who is the Senior Vice President of Preclinical Research and Development at InMed. They trade on Nasdaq, INM. Karam Takhar, he's the Vice President of Corporate Development and Investor Relations at Skye Bioscience. They trade on the OTC as SKYE. David Elsley, President and CEO of Cardiol Therapeutics, and Pnina Fishman, CEO of Can-Fite Biopharma, CANF. Welcome, everyone. Very excited about this discussion, which I know is very nuanced and very, very interesting. I think that the first thing that would be cool is maybe in a couple minutes each, introduce yourselves and your companies. Let's start with David.
Sure. Thank you. It's great to be here today. I'm David Elsley. I'm the founder, president, CEO, and largest shareholder of Cardiol Therapeutics. The team at Cardiol Therapeutics has worked in the area of heart failure medicine for now over 30 years, and our interest in the area of medicinal cannabinoids is rooted in the discovery made at the National Institute of Health that was published in the Journal of the American College of Cardiology, which first recognized the ability of the cannabidiol molecule to reverse fibrosis and inflammation in cardiac tissue. That fascinated us because fibrosis remains the leading cause and one of the underlying drivers of heart failure, which is the leading cause of death and disability in the Western world today. So that is our interest in this very important area of medicine.
Fantastic. Thank you. Karam?
Hi, thanks, Javier. Thanks to the team at Benzinga. As mentioned, my name is Karam Takhar. I handle corporate development and investor relations at Skye. At Skye, we're working to unlock the pharmaceutical potential of cannabinoids in areas of disease with unmet need. And we're doing so by taking some of the antidotes that are known about initially the major cannabinoids, and then looking to make those molecules more druggable. So we're working with new chemical entities. These are not molecules that you'll find naturally occurring in the plant. And we're able to see that we're able to improve on the therapeutic benefit for certain diseases. Our lead indication is for glaucoma, and there is a wide body of evidence that suggests that THC can help with glaucoma in terms of lowering IOP and potentially providing neuroprotection, which is ultimately the holy grail in glaucoma. So we're rapidly approaching our phase 1, should be up and off the ground in the next 6 months here, and already planning kicking off our phase 2 in the second half of 2022.
Thank you very much. Pnina, do you want to go?
Yes, sure. Hi. So I'm the CEO of Can-Fite Biopharma. It's an Israeli-based company where we develop small molecule drugs which target a specific cell surface receptor belonging to the adenosine receptor family. This receptor can be found only in pathological body cells, but not in normal body cells. It happened to be that cannabinoids bind with very high affinity to the very same receptor. So all the experience that Can-Fite has been acquired along the years, bringing our drugs into phase 3 clinical studies, is now we put all the efforts into the development of cannabinoids which bind to the very same target. We can show in vitro and in vivo in a very early stage if a given cannabinoid has the capability to perform well in the clinic. So this is what we are doing in Can-Fite. Currently, we are pushing forward into the clinic a cannabinoid, CBD, with very minute dosages. It is effective against liver fibrosis and also liver cancer.
Very, very cool. Toda raba, Pnina. And thank you for joining us late in the day. Eric?
Yeah, thank you. My name is Eric Su. I'm the VP of R&D at InMed Pharmaceutical. I joined InMed in 2018. InMed is a clinical stage pharmaceutical company focusing on using rare cannabinoids to treat diseases. Our executive about 20 to 30 years experience in pharmaceutical drug development. InMed is a publicly traded company, as you mentioned before, and on a Nasdaq under the symbol IMM. We also have a manufacturing platform called Integrison. The primary goal for this platform was to supply rare cannabinoid for our own R&D program. As you know, at the time that when we started extracting rare cannabinoid from the plant, is very, you get very minimum amount and we're not able to support the program itself. Currently, we have a dermatology program that just started phase 2 in a clinical trial for a devastating skin disease called epidermolysis bullosa, or EB. We also have an ocular program in the preclinical stage for the treatment glaucoma. We have strong scientific evidence showing that CBN or cannabinol have a robust therapeutic potential for these two indications. In addition, we have additional undisclosed targets or program in the early stage for other indications as well. Recently, we announced that we're going to acquire a company called Biomedica. Biomedica is a cannabinoid manufacturing company that focusing on the health and wellness market. They have one product right now on the market, and there will be a couple more coming in the very next few quarters. In addition, Biomedica also has a proprietary cannabinoid analog library, which allow us to have access to it, and through that we'll be able to screen additional compounds for different indications. Thank you.
Super. Thank you very much. So let's jump right into it, right? So what all of you have in common is you're working with cannabinoids and cannabinoid molecules. So Pnina, can you explain a little bit about cannabinoids, cannabinoid molecules, and how are they different from say what we think about, like when we say medical cannabis? How is this different, right? And can you share a little bit? And keep in mind, many of the people watching here are not necessarily invested in the cannabinoid space or very familiar with these innovative sorts of healthcare alternatives.
Yes, of course, I will do it in a very concise way. Usually people are looking at cannabis, marijuana, as an extract from the plant. And I don't know how many of them know that actually the cannabis plant is the major active components are cannabinoids, which are divided into two subclasses, the THC, which is a psychotic fraction, and the cannabidiol CBD, which is the other part. Each one of them has therapeutic effects. And all of us, I think the common denominator regarding all the people who are participating in these sessions and many others in other companies are trying to purify and to develop a pharmaceutical product based on purified compounds which come out of the cannabis plant. I hope I defined it in the right way, but each one of the 4 people who are participating here will agree with me that this is a real mission, very interesting one, and I hope that each one will accomplish it in his way.
For sure. That's a lovely message. Anyone want to add anything in relation to cannabinoids? Anything else that you want to say? David, Eric, Karam?
Yeah, I think like a lot of companies on the panel, most of us don't work with plants. We don't grow plants. We don't harvest.
Mhm.
We use modern pharmaceutical technique to produce a cannabinoid and follow a drug development path to get this to get these drugs on the market through a regulatory clinical path that like a traditional pharmaceutical drugs.
Mm-hmm. Why? Why do you choose to not work with plants? What are the benefits, right, of working through pharmaceutical traditional routes?
I think the main reason is so you fully understand the drug that you're developing. It's of paramount importance to be able to explain to the FDA exactly the chemical entity you're studying. So through chemical synthesis or organic chemistry, we can make these molecules in a pure form. We can stabilize them. We can make them consistently, reproducibly, and we can scale their production. That's fundamentally important to develop a new medicine so you can explain to regulators, and in our case, cardiologists, exactly what active medical ingredient the patient is taking. So in our case, we make it through our chemical synthesis. We formulate it both in an oral formulation and in a new subcutaneous formulation that we're developing in order to target or smart target the drug directly at cardiac tissue where the drug can be most effective. But importantly, the only drug we're using in this case is cannabidiol, and that is the drug of interest. It has anti-inflammatory properties that are really quite impressive, similar to that of the steroids, but without the toxicological baggage that comes along with steroids, which limit their use in the cardiac setting. Many steroids can actually make certain cardiac diseases, exacerbate certain cardiac conditions. Our fascination and interest in this molecule is its anti-inflammatory properties and its anti-fibrotic properties without the toxicology profile that typically accompanies other anti-inflammatory strategies.
Fantastic. I would love to hear from Karam and Eric a little bit more on what it means, to have this scientific approach to the field of cannabinoids.
Yeah,
Sure.
I would just,
Should I go first? Or?
Go for it.
Yeah. So I think the traditional way of developing small molecule drugs is typically taking a receptor or known receptor and then screen large library and see which compound can bind to it in very high affinity. In the last few years, there's a lot more scientific study surrounding cannabinoid, and it's now known that cannabinoid not only interact with a cellular receptor such as CB1 and CB2. There's a host range of receptor interact with, and it's this interaction that actually result in the therapeutic potential of those cannabinoids. So, for example, in InMed, we take a very different approach. When we look at this, we don't just look at, okay, which cannabinoid bind to what receptor, and if that receptor is related or involved in a disease indication. We actually look at the compound as you got to screen the whole cell environment and see what kind of effect you're going to get for a specific indication. Give you an example for our glaucoma program. We started with taking a retinal ganglion cell and put it in a pressure chamber to mimic what's going on inside a patient's eyes. The reason we do that is these patients have IOP, and it's those elevation of IOP that eventually destroy the neuron and lead to blindness. So we take the retinal ganglion cell, put it in the pressure chamber, then screen large amount of cannabinoid and ask the question which one can protect those neurons and result in neuroprotection. So through our screen, CBN actually has the best effect with the wide range of therapeutic window. So that's how we approach our screening. And then after that, we then move to an in vivo model, demonstrate proof of concept efficacy in the in vivo model, formulate the drugs, then scale up. And then at that point, you start following the more conventional drug development path, going through conduct a GLP study for safety, and then go through FDA a process for regulatory. So that I think that's very different than the traditional small molecule drug, where you just look at one receptor and the affinity of that compound binding that receptor.
Totally. What about you, Karam? What does it mean for you to approach cannabinoids from this scientific standpoint?
Yeah, I think it's important for, you mentioned that, a lot of the investors that are here today have invested in pharmaceutical cannabinoids yet. We truly believe at Skye that this is going to be the way to really unlock the most value in this plant. And these are tried, tested, true methodologies. We're not worrying about, regulations in the US to allow for legalization. This is a separate path that's delineated, regardless of what happens on that end. We're following a different path. So I think that's a key takeaway for your investors. I think for all this on this panel, we had an important moment earlier in this year that kind of validated this approach, which was the acquisition of GW Pharma by Jazz Pharma for $7.2 billion. That's single-handedly the largest transaction in the cannabis space, regardless of whether it's a CPG or medical or pharmaceutical. So with our approach, the cannabis and its constituents and cannabinoids have been taken for millennia. And people have understood that there is some sort of therapeutic benefit in consuming this plant. What we're trying to do is really distill it, get away from the variability that comes from growing the plant between different strains, species, your processing, using a synthetic compound, and then not really necessarily trying to reinvent the wheel with what we're doing. There's a lot of evidence and data that suggests that there are specific disease indications and therapeutic benefits of cannabinoids, but there's also been a lot of challenges in delivering cannabinoids. They're poorly bioavailable when ingested. When you take them through inhalation, you have a faster onset, but you also have a faster offset. So using the tools within pharmaceutical sciences to really make this a more druggable platform. And as Eric alluded to, it's become very abundant that this is a very druggable target. The ECS is found throughout the entire body, pretty much in every cell. So really trying to streamline the approach and be specific to your targets. And that can be done through modification of the molecules, different routes of administration, and through formulation. And we're seeing that all those are important in developing these pharmaceutical agents.
Super interesting. And I mean, we'll get back to drug and molecule delivery in a second, but both of you, Karam and Eric, you touched on regulations. I'd love to hear a little bit from David and then from Pnina. But David, let's start with you. What's the situation with the FDA? How does the regulatory framework work? What can and can't be done, and how?
Well, we're developing our drugs as ethical medicines. So we have a phase 2-3 program that has a FDA cleared IND that is now operational and enrolling patients throughout the United States currently in high-risk cardiac patients at high risk for mortality or morbidity because of their immune response to the COVID virus. So here we're not studying the impact of the drug on COVID per se. We're using this as basically a gateway study to explore the cardioprotective properties of cannabidiol to insulate patients against the profound inflammatory response of the immune system's attack on the virus. So that's a phase 2-3 program. It was cleared by the cardio-renal panel of the FDA, and we just recently cleared a second phase 2 program in a very important area of medicine, acute myocarditis, which remains the leading cause of sudden cardiac death in children and young adults. It's now a recognized complication of the COVID virus. Historically, it was the influenza virus, which was one of the major viral infections that caused myocarditis. But we now also see it as a rare complication of mRNA vaccination, and some of the chemotherapeutic agents and checkpoint inhibitors are also causing acute myocarditis. And experimentally, we've shown this molecule to be profoundly protective against the fibrotic insult on the heart or the autoimmune attack on the heart that occurs in autoimmune myocarditis. So we have to separate that. I mean, it is not new that drugs are discovered often from botanical sources. You can take Apple as a classical example, but it is imperative that we develop these cannabinoid-based medicines, as ethical medicines. So we have taken it through the traditional ethical medicine development pathway, which involves phase 1. We conducted one of the largest trials in healthy adults and 52 adults where we dosed patients quite high at 30 mg per kilo and shown the molecule, even at that dose, to be very safe in the patient population with no changes in electrophysiological status. So it is imperative that to bring credibility to this new important area of medicine, that we expose it to the rigors of controlled randomized clinical trial development and strong scientific basis. And that's exactly what we're doing at Cardiol Therapeutics. And I'm thrilled that all these other organizations involved here today and others are doing the same, because this medicine has a great deal to offer patients if developed through proper clinical development pathway.
And we'll move on to Pnina in just a second, but I want to double down on something that you said that just resonated with me. You said, this is a condition that affects children, right? And we often do not associate cannabinoids and use in children, right? Even though we've seen, very successful results in children suffering from rare forms of epilepsy. But how, since we're talking about regulations, how do regulations play into using cannabinoids to treat certain health conditions in children, right?
But again, if we separate it and we just think of it as a drug, cannabidiol is a molecule, it's a chemical. If we're developing it as a chemical entity or as a drug. So if it confers therapeutic benefit in a adolescent who is at high risk for sudden cardiac death because they develop cardiac inflammation, that will be well received by the cardiology community, the pediatric cardiology community, and will be embraced by the Food and Drug Administration if it's developed properly. So the whole notion of age gating and this type of thing is part of a regulated industry that we're not part of. We're developing this as a medicine. We have to continue to position this and think about it as a medicine. That is how we're going to make these important discoveries available to help patients.
Super clear. What about you, Pnina? What are you seeing in terms of compliance and regulatory challenges, right? You're operating in Israel, but also have global ambitions. So how does all of this play in, balance out?
Actually, the company is based in Israel, and what we have here is the company management and the research laboratories. And in the United States, we have a whole team which is on top of the preclinical and clinical development of the company. I fully support, David, your view, since this is the way we are currently at Can-Fite developing our original drugs, which again, I will say, target a specific cell surface receptors. Like you, David, all our drugs are synthetic ones. When we realized that CBD and not the THC, CBD at nanomolar concentrations bind to the Can-Fite target, we realized that we have made an opportunity or a chance here to develop a product in a much faster way, still vis-a-vis the FDA, but to embark on the fact that CBD can be given and is given today to human beings without going through the whole pathway that the FDA would like to see you going through. At the same time, I'm asking you, David, if at this point CBD will be able to prevent the myocarditis or all the adverse events in children, wouldn't you treat them with the CBD and not wait for the synthetic molecule to do the job? Because we do not have time now to wait so long for the approval of the FDA, while so many children can be damaged from the vaccine.
Tough question.
Yeah, that's yeah.
Do you want to give it a shot at that?
It's again, it's imperative to develop a new medicine properly. It has to be prescribed by a specialist. So, in the case of a young child with acute myocarditis, it could be a pediatric cardiologist or a cardiologist. They need to understand the drug. They need to prescribe it. They need to understand the dose. They need to understand its side effect profile. They need to understand its drug interactions. So I would, I would stand firm with our position that if you want to deliver this as an ethical medicine, it's going to help thousands of patients around the world. It has to be developed through the rigors of controlled clinical trial development. And that is not just mandated by the FDA, that's mandated by the EMA and regulators around the world. But that is how a medicine truly becomes available broadly, because it's understood by specialists that prescribe it. And that is how it can confer its greatest benefit to the largest number of patients. When we get into experimenting with one-off patients, one patient here, one patient there, there's no control in that process. I understand the urgency because we deal in disease states that take the lives of young, healthy adults, children, and middle-aged folks, because heart failure is an epidemic. It's driven by diabetes, obesity, and high blood pressure. All those factors continue to rise in the developed world. So there is an urgency, but if it is best to develop it through the appropriate process so it can get its greatest acceptance by the specialty community that treat these patients and make medicines available to them.
Definitely. Very interesting. And for those watching who are not familiar with the history of cannabinoids, it's interesting to look into the people who discovered it, and many of it comes from Israel, right? There's this very famous scientist by the name of Raphael Mechoulam, who was the first to really look into these compounds and molecules and understand their effects separately. So for anyone watching, I do recommend that you do your research on Dr. Mechoulam. I think you're in for a treat. Let's move on to delivery mechanisms. I know we talked about them a little bit. Karam mentioned them. Eric mentioned them. So, Karam, can you elaborate a little bit on the challenges around the delivery of this molecule? How can these challenges be solved? What are the different, benefits to different delivery mechanisms for cannabinoid molecules?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So, I think every indication, every route of administration, and individual compound is going to have its own challenges. But I'll focus a little bit on what we're doing at Skye with our glaucoma program. So, as I mentioned before, there's a strong body of evidence. There's clinical studies showing that human consumption of cannabis and the activation of the CB1 receptor can lower IOP in humans. These trials were done in the 70s. The issue is that they were either ingesting it or they're inhaling it. And when you do that, you get systemic exposure. So you're getting the THC also into the brain, and you're getting the associated high with that. What researchers at the time in the 80s tried to do is they tried to extract the THC compound and put it into the eye. THC is inherently oily or lipophilic, and the surface of the eye is watery, and you try to drop an oily substance onto a watery surface, it doesn't get very far. So it was kind of scrapped at that point. What we've done with our collaborators out of the University of Mississippi is we've taken a very standard approach, which is called a prodrug approach, where we've modified the THC molecule. We've basically added another molecular structure to that molecule that changes its chemical properties. The molecule on its own is not pharmacologically active. Instead, those modifications changed its physiochemical properties that now allow it to be more soluble and penetrate into the eye. Once it's in the eye, it's metabolized back into THC. So now we're able to give a microdose of the THC into the eye where we can see the therapeutic benefit and avoid the adverse effects like the associated high and some of the other side effects like drops in blood pressure. But additionally, not only modifying the molecule was important, there's a lot of work that went into the formulation and using different excipients and different nanoemulsion technologies that we've been able to show that we can improve delivery and also increase the increase the response and the duration of effect. So, it's a multi-pronged approach within this field and what we're doing.
What about you, Pnina?
I need to apologize because my presentation will be starting in 3 minutes from now. So thank you very much, everybody. And
we're on the same track. We have 10 more minutes, and your presentation will be up next.
My company presentation is starting just now, so I do apologize. It's my company presentation now in a parallel session.
Oh, yes.
I'm going to jump in here. You're on the same track.
Yes,
Pnina,
we're scheduled for 10 in 10 minutes.
In 10 minutes, so right after this.
Right after this.
So it needs to be a little bit less because I need to leave for my presentation. That's sorry.
Fine. Okay, that's fine. I just wanted to clarify that it'll be right here after this panel. So just to prevent any confusion. All right,
we'll just stay on here. No worries.
Why don't I add some color to the delivery?
Yes.
I came from a gene therapy background. So as you know, gene therapy, it's one of the biggest hurdles is delivery. So when they talk about gene therapy, they always talk about delivery. So taking our glaucoma program, for example, once we identify the API, in this case CBN, we need to make sure that we can get to the target tissue, and the preferred route is local. So in this case, through eye drop. So we screen several different technology that can deliver the drug effectively to the target tissue. And in our case is retina. We want to get the drug to, but not only the formulation itself is important, but you got to think ahead and think about if that drug product can be scaled up, because that's what's going to the patients. And also, can you transport that drug product and store that drug product? So there are a lot of consideration when it comes to delivery or formulations. It's not just getting it to the site you want, but also ahead of time, what does the manufacturing path looks like? What is the stability of the drug product looks like? So there are a lot of consideration one need to think about before while you're working on the formulations.
Anyone else? David, to you, anything to add in relation to delivering mechanisms and what you are both experimenting with, experiencing, learning?
So we're just, our objective is to optimize blood levels from a therapeutic perspective. So in the acute setting, we're using an oral therapy in acute intervention to get high dose of drug on board quickly. But in the chronic therapeutic setting going forward in heart failure, for example, which is a chronic condition, we've developed a subcutaneous formulation. As mentioned by others, some of these molecules are challenging. They're very lipophilic. They are really only soluble in an oil type solvent system. So that creates challenges when you think about subcutaneous or IV routes, because oil-based compounds are not injectable typically. So we've created a formulation that is viscosity similar to water to enable to be administered sub-Q, where we can put drug directly into systemic circulation so it doesn't pass through the GI and it's not metabolized by the liver or not subject to first pass. And we can put more drug on board more efficiently with a view to using less drug to achieve the same therapeutic outcome, which should improve further the safety profile.
Fantastic. I'm fascinated by the topic of this panel and just complex diseases and using cannabinoids. I do see that you find common ground on treating inflammation, and I know we've gone into this, but for our viewers, right, and especially for investors, right, I'd like to recap a little bit which conditions each one of you are focusing on. I know Can-Fite is focusing on liver cancer and inflammation. So want to share what each one of you is really looking at and what you see as the market opportunity and the addressable market, in terms of investors. Let's start with Cardiol Therapeutics. That is CRDL on the Nasdaq, in case you're interested in the stock. So, David, once again, tell us very briefly what conditions you're targeting and why there is a market opportunity and the size of the market opportunity.
So our primary focus is cardiac inflammation. So we're developing the cannabidiol molecules in 2 different drug forms as anti-inflammatory agents, target acute myocarditis, inflammation secondary to viral infection. Could be in the context of the COVID virus, for example, which is our largest trial setting currently. And then we have a program in heart failure, which is a condition that is addressable to 26 million people in the developed world potentially. So it is a very large medical problem. So these are great challenges. Inflammation has never been properly addressed in the cardiac setting. We believe this molecule has great potential in that area, and that remains our sole focus.
Fantastic. Let's move on to InMed. InMed is traded on the Nasdaq. It's INM. Eric, what conditions are you targeting, and what's the market opportunity? Why should investors, buy into InMed?
Yeah, sure. So we have from our pharmaceutical program, we have our lead program, which is in IMM 755 for treatment of EB, as I mentioned before. CBN in this case is API is formulated sterile cream containing non-irritating excipients, and that's because EB patients often have very delicate skins with chronic open wounds. So we want to make sure that the cream or drug product itself is non-irritating and sterile to minimize any potential infection. This program is now in phase 2. So we filed a clinical trial application to begin phase 2 in several countries in Europe. We expect to start enrollment in the next few weeks. Because this is a rare disease, we'll enroll about 20 patients within a 12-month area to look at specifically the safety as well as the preliminary efficacy in patients with treatment to symptom as well as wound healing. So this is a 28-day study. We also have a ocular program, as I mentioned before, for treatment glaucoma. This is the IMM0AA program. It's a sterile eye drop formulation, and it's a microemulsion surfactant based. And this is the early stage, still in preclinical. We are currently scaling up the drug products to support a GLP study, and we have conducted a dose range to understand the dose regimen, which are information needed to support a GLP study. Now, we also, as I said, have a cannabinoid manufacturing called Integrison for pharmaceutical grade cannabinoid, and by combining with the recent acquire of the Bay Medica company, we will have access to health and wellness market as well with some of these rare cannabinoids. So they're a great opportunity for investors in InMed.
Fantastic. Last but not least, Skye Bioscience. That's SKYE on the OTC markets. A stock that has more than doubled its price this year. So what are you doing? What conditions are you looking at? And again, what's the addressable market? What's the investment opportunity?
For sure. So our primary indication, our lead indication, and the primary objective of the goal of the company is to pivot from a preclinical company and into a clinical company. And that first indication is glaucoma. It's a huge market, nearly $7 billion, over 100 million patients diagnosed worldwide. Mm-hmm. There's really been a lack of innovation within the space. The current therapies in the market are generics at this point, or branded generics. They make up 80% of that market. Why we are compelled to kind of go after this market is that there's existing data that we're building off of, and that data suggests that there is therapeutic benefit of using THC in glaucoma. The challenge has been around delivery. We have a solution to that, and our preclinical models show that not only does our molecule outperform those top two classes of therapies in terms of potency, but also over duration of effect. So, that's 80% of a $7 billion market. That's got us quite excited. And then to layer on top of that, it's much earlier, but as Eric mentioned too, this whole potential of neuroprotection, and it's well understood in various models that cannabinoids can provide that benefit. That ultimately is the end goal for patients in glaucoma. Additionally, we do have another molecule. It's much earlier. It's in the R&D stages. It's a CBD prodrug as well. And we've seen all sorts of different kind of therapeutic benefits in pain, opioid sparing, inflammation, fibrosis. So we're really trying to narrow our scope and kind of develop a plan to see which indication we're going to follow first.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Unfortunately, we've run out of time. Today, we heard about pharmaceutical cannabinoids and their impact on treatment for complex diseases. Our panelists today were Eric Zhu from InMed, that's INM on the Nasdaq. We had Karam Takhar from Skye Bioscience, that's SKYE on the OTC markets. David Elsley, President and CEO of Cardiol Therapeutics, CRDL on the Nasdaq, and Pnina Fishman, who will be joining us again right now on, and Can-Fite Biopharma trades on the New York Stock Exchange under the ticker CANF. My name is Javier Hasse. I'm Managing Director for Benzinga Cannabis. Go check us out, benzinga.com/cannabis, to stay on top of everything related to cannabis, cannabinoids, and more. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us today. If anyone wants to reach you, please email us to events@benzinga.com, and we'll make sure to direct you to these companies.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot, guys. Thanks a lot, Javier, for taking time out. Javier, you the man. You know it. I love it. Where are you? Where are you, by the way? You're always
in Colombia. I'm in Colombia. I wish I could show you the view. I'm sitting here. This is like a crazy place. I can see I can see the ocean. But you know what's more interesting? I loved your ETF stats. I would have sworn IBB was the largest healthcare ETF.
That would have been not a bad guess.
It's dated. I think my knowledge is dated. It's like from 10 years ago.
Why you would have guessed that is because IBB is like the most active, like traders use the IBB, right? And it's a biotechnology focused ETF, and it's very actively traded. It might be the most traded, which is why you would think that. But yeah, it's the one that all the traders know. Oh, the IBB, it's code for biotech. So that's why. Javier Hasse, everyone, Managing Director of Benzinga Cannabis. Guy's the man. Javier, will I be seeing you in 2 weeks? I think I will be.
Oh, yeah. Benzinga Cannabis Capital Conference, New York City, October 14th and 15th. In person, return. Cannot miss it.
I haven't seen you in like 2 years. It's going to be fun.
It's going to be more than fun. It's going to be amazing. It's going to be educational, entertaining, and of course, very profitable.
Yeah, dude, I'm so excited. I can't wait. October 14th. Guys, bzcannabis.com. I'll plug in more in a second. Thanks a lot, Javier.